for me. The impetus for the book was my husband who died very suddenly in 2017, and this was a huge part of my grief journey writing this. And so this is a really tender part. Mia had always known she would be a writer, which seemed like a big deal to most people, but was really so simple. Mia still sang when she wrote, and through the rest of the process too, even when it seemed impossible, especially when it seemed impossible. Through all the edits and edits and edits, and even through the swirling black hole of doubt that always lurked nearby, threatening to pull her in at any moment, she loved it. The impossibility of turning her idea into 400 pages was possible. And if that was possible, then anything was possible. Writing was Mia's superpower. What if, Mia wondered now, wrapped in George's cold, buttery sheets, everyone left the womb with their superpowers spelled out for them on a sheet of parchment rolled into their tiny fist? Her husband. You will die when you are 44. You will be young and beautiful and full of life and vitality and will make sense to no one. Your superpower is your heart. It is as infinite as the ocean. Follow it. Their elder. Your father will die when you are 5. You will keep him alive in both mind and heart because he will pass these parts of himself on to you. Your superpower is your emotional fluency. Use it for good. They're younger. Your father will die 2 days after you turn 2. Your mom will cry all the time, but know that she's breaking herself down in order to put herself back together. Your superpower is your focus. Pick your path with care. The room turned apricot with promise as Mia's eyes leaked down her face. Even when she was happy, she was sad, and that was just how widowhood was going to be. Mia's acceptance of this felt like a medal she had earned from battle.
I love this framing of superpowers.
Oh, yeah.
And the ability to connect to a thing that's really life-giving, even when, like, the life has been sucked out of your life.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm curious in your, not for Mia, but for you, in your three-dimensional real life. Yeah. When did you know that when did you recognize your superpower, and when did you know it was time to use it?
That's a good question. My father was a professor, and so he had most summer days off. And every summer from the time I was like in 1st grade to 10th grade, we had summer school, my brother and myself. And part of summer school was writing. And I always just it felt easy to me in ways that other things absolutely did not. And I enjoyed it. I liked people responding to it. And then I had a friend in 1st grade named True Donald, and he wanted to write a love note to his girlfriend. So I helped him, and I told her
Was that a paid gig?
It wasn't, which was stupid.
Seriously, gotta work on the business model.
Yeah, exactly. I told her that he wanted to take a bubble bath with her, and it got taken up by the principal, and that was the beginning of my
Your salacious trouble.
Yeah. And I always knew I wanted to do it, but I majored in English in college. I didn't take any creative writing, but I had journal throughout, and it was the only place that I was so emotionally astute. I write so much better than I speak in terms of my heart. So that's when I knew.
Yeah. Were there walls that you hit in writing about material that was so connected to your own heart?
Oh yeah, every day. I mean, I did it. My second novel was very much a memoir about growing up in Alabama. And that was the first time I came up against, will my family be mad at me? Am I sharing too much? And I pulled back as much as I could in order to protect them. But ultimately, I read Anne Lamott's book, Bird by Bird.
I love that book.
It's the best book. And she said, it's your story. You have to write like they're dead. You can't care. Because it's your perception. And she granted me freedom with that. Not Not that I haven't taken flack, but ultimately it doesn't bother me.
Yeah. I appreciated, somewhere I read your reflection on the challenge of writing a memoir
Oh yeah.
and how lots of people who experience grief, myself included, so I don't think it was in the introduction, but I wrote a book called Touching Two Worlds, which was a reflection on my experience losing my dad and my brother in very close proximity. And in my professional life as a psychologist, I started playing back and forth between my utter shattering experience of grief and then my grown-up head around what you do with those kinds of experiences. So the decision to write a memoir, where again lots of people who experience grief want to write about it,
Right.
and publishers are like, another
Yeah,
grief memoir,
yeah.
like
It's not
really?
bad enough.
It's just not breaking my heart enough.
Yeah.
So the decision to fictionalize it, or thinly veiled, write it as
Thinly
a
veiled.
novel.
Right.
Tell me about that
Sure.
as a writer, or about that process.
Sure, it was the second book of a 2-book contract. The first book I wrote right after Ronan died, and it was a story about OxyContin abuse, masking grief. Then for the second book, I said, "Can I write a memoir? I'm ready now." And they said, "No."
Nobody cares.
Nobody knows who you are. What? Get over yourself. And like, meanwhile, there's like D-list celebrities who get paid millions of dollars. But so I said, "All right, I'll write a novel." So I wrote a very thinly veiled novel about my experience, and the father in the book is absolutely my father, who also died 2 years after Ronan died. So it was just a tremendous way. Like, of course, I hoped that it would sell, and I hoped that it would help people, but it was such a help to me. I wrote it during COVID, and these guys were in virtual school in my garage. Like, it was bleak. So to come out, with any kind of victory is a huge win. And yeah.
What are the moments after the book has come out and in your book tour experience that you've really felt the victory? You've really felt the satisfaction of, look at this thing that I did, that I made.
I think when these two are in the audience, and they're in the audience a lot, and getting emails from other widows or widowers who feel seen, who weren't seen before, I think it's taught people that we actually want to talk about the people that are missing. To pretend it away is more painful than to bring it up. And that, I think, is, a huge piece of news for people. I never knew before I lost someone how important it was to just say their name to somebody. So that's really been the victory. And People magazine was dope, so
Yeah.
I'll take that too.
Way to go. I'm curious, and maybe we can even ask the audience a little bit,
Sure.
but just the experience of parenting in the midst of grief and of raising little ones. You guys can weigh in if you want. I think in our culture we kind of segregate death and children and grief and children. There's, in my experience, not a lot of kind of acculturation or conversation for kids and with kids about death and grief, so that that's not for them to know about.
Right.
But it then catches lots of kids and families really unprepared when it happens.
Oh, yeah.
So I guess I wonder how you've navigated that. And
So Renan suffered a brain aneurysm. He left for work one day, never came home. And I did the best I could, but I was crying all the time.
yeah,
But I was also very focused on doing, the endless list of unraveling a life. It's a job in and of itself. We had this amazing community. We had friends coming in, just like in the book, to help with them. But I don't think I hid a thing from them. Would you agree? Like, for better or worse?
I don't remember it.
Isn't that crazy? What about you, Liv?
What?
Do you remember after Abba died?
not really.
And I took it so serious. I was very aware,
Yeah.
even as I couldn't help it. But that's it's the beauty of life, but
Yeah.
it was very, very painful time that I will, and that's another reason why this book was so important for me, because this is a capsule.
Yeah, you talked about it as a little time capsule that
Mhm.
maybe in 5 years, in 10 years, you all will go back and read it and have
Yeah.
this different perspective of like, oh, that's what was going on with my mom
Yeah.
when that was happening.
Yeah, no, Ari wrote me very sweet notes. Like, you're doing so much better. And so I knew, like, well, you me too. You too.
I'm sure you gave her some high
Yes,
fives and
all the
hugs.
best. All the best, love.
What are some untold stories that didn't make it into the book that maybe you wish you could have included, or
Really
any
what?
darlings you had to kill?
I didn't have to kill. I was very, because I had a plot to follow that wasn't from real life, I was careful to only include the memories that were really important to me. I think that, at this point out, 6 years out, I don't remember what it felt like to be married. And at the point that I wrote this, which was 2 years ago, I was starting to forget too. So I wish I could have, it's like a flicker in the distance. But I can't, to have a partner like that, ride or die. Like, I have my kids, I have my dog. But I missed that the most. I wish I could have remembered more. This was as much as I could remember.
I think one of the things that's been interesting for me as an author is that many sections of my book were written almost in real time. Like, were written in the hospital as I'm sitting with my family, and I was writing to just do something,
Yeah.
to just be present to what was happening right then.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are sections that are really raw,
Yeah.
and so readers will read them, and I think they look at me as if I'm still in that spot.
Right.
And I want to be like, oh no, I'm cool now.
Yeah,
I'm fine.
Totally fine.
But then it's almost surprising. So I think when you write a book that has a little bit of a timestamp around grief, sometimes people are surprised that you're okay.
Right.
And I guess I wonder if you've had those moments.
I think that, I live in such a close community that I'm able to pick the kids up every day because of my job, and I think I got a few looks after the book came out. Like, I had no idea that you were even going through this, or that your husband had died. But for the most part, I just feel like most people not are scared of me, but a little, maybe a little. When you're
apart, are you gonna cry?
no, in terms of like
Or
the human superpower to
like how
crawl
strong
out
you
of
are.
to crawl out of the pit and get back on the road with 2 kids to it. Like, so many people are so kind and say you're so strong, but you just don't have a choice.
Right.
What was I gonna do? So that's kind of been a nice effect of at least feeling like a badass, whether or not that's the perception of other people around me. That's been nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think too, one of the things that I have enjoyed about getting some familiarity with your work is there's also a lightness to how you hold grief and death, and Touching Two Worlds, my book is very much about that, like living in joy and creativity and playfulness, while you're also sort of, you have this passport over to the other side, like the shadow, the sick, the dead, the sad.
Yeah.
And I really enjoy that, the back and forth, like a little bit of irreverence, a little bit of like,
Thank
okay,
you.
some things about death are like a little funny and super
Yeah.
bizarre,
Yeah.
and we can call those out in a way that's not always heavy, morose, sad.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I think that I was always a kid who was funny. And so humor was my way to deal with whatever emotion was thrown at me. And it took me a while to laugh again, but when I did, that became the title of the book, because I was laughing with a friend about something finally, and I said, oh, #fun widow, and then she was like, oh, I guess I can laugh now, and we laughed. And it felt so good because it had been so long and everyone had been tiptoeing around me because I was a mess. So yeah, I think that to be able to still see the joy and the magic, we were talking about that upstairs, after you've witnessed death up close, is a choice you have to make every day, and it's, you know, a sense of humor that you have to adapt in order to be a resilient human being. And so, yeah, let's try our best.
Keep it a little light.
Yeah. I try my best.
So my dad died of esophageal cancer. We knew he would die. We had a little bit of that timing and on ramp to be present with him. So my siblings and I were all in bed with my dad when he died.
That's amazing.
And it was, in so many ways, a really, really extraordinarily beautiful death.
How so?
Because of the presence.
He was there.
He was there, we were there. And it had that sense of like, we're sending you off in love. Obviously, that's a different death than someone leaves for work and just never returns.
Right.
And my brother died in a more sudden, traumatic way. So, you know, all deaths are a little bit different. But after my dad died and his spirit had kind of left the building,
Yeah.
his jaw hung open in this really weird way. And it bothered me so much. Like, I was trying to be really present and sort of
Right.
like soulful and like, good job, Dad. And then his jaw was like just
I know, it's
not
awful.
a way you could have your jaw as a live person.
Right. Well, there's so many things about it. I mean, when that happened to Renan, you know, I'd always assumed that there was a God and there was a spiritual universe and people had souls, but then when that happened, everything just, how could this happen to such an amazing person so young? But witnessing it firsthand, like, the body is just a carapace. The soul is the life.
Yeah.
And to see that with Renan and my father, as you did with your brother and dad, I mean, that'll sober you up real quick, but it also gives you such a unique perspective.
Yeah.
And when I'm at my best, I remember that, which is definitely not every day.
I think it is one of the things that grief rearranges, is what we think we know about the universe or spirituality or God. Like, it really is the rubber to the road brass tacks. Like, what do we think is happening here?
Right. He's still here. Do you think they're still here?
I feel their presence in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I would say, maybe it's a little bit strange, but I feel most connected to them in my own body because, like, my big shoulders, like my dad had those shoulders, and my brother and I had the same blue eyes. And so I feel that kind of like cellular genetic connection between us. So sometimes just in my own skin, I'm like, oh, hey guys, like we're all here together in some way.
That's really nice.
My brother also really loved Magers, which is the lake a couple blocks from here. And so I live where I can see the lake, and that's a connection to him. It's like knowing that his body was in that water, floating around on a paddleboard, and that I kind of carry that forward when I get out on my paddleboard in the same water. And there's a little continuity there.
That's
So
beautiful.
that's where I feel it. How about you?
I see it in my sons. Ari is the exact replication of his father, and Vlad is a lot like my dad. So it's coincidental, but it's also not. And I see it all the time in their mannerisms, the way they talk, the way their hearts respond to things.
What's the next book?
The next book is so I'm at the end of a contract, and you know I've been slogging along for 6 books.
Wow.
Yeah. You know.
Also, good job to get a 6-book contract.
You
That's
know,
pretty epic these days.
I do not give up if I want something badly enough, but you know, just making a little bit more every time, but not making a living. I mean, it's a joke. So for the next contract, I want to write a bigger book. I want to be published in hardcover. I want to make a living wage. I want to support my family. So this is a book, it's historical fiction, and it's about this incredible woman who, her name was Mar Mandelbaum, and she was the greatest fence of all time. Lower East Side in Manhattan during the Gilded Age.
The greatest fence.
Fence, meaning that in the front of the store she sold flour and baked in the back, all stolen goods.
Okay.
Like running New York City. And
Got
she had a protege. And I'm writing a story. I'm trying to base it on Oliver Twist. I'm really swinging the fences. But I think I finally on this trip, we've been on a 10-day trip throughout the
Midwest?
country. No, we were in the Northeast like 2 days ago.
Wow.
Yeah, but I loosened up something in my brain, and so I feel good about it.
Exciting.
I hope so. What are you working on?
My next book is not that interesting probably to anybody here, but it's about the psychology of exiting your company.
That sounds great!
I help entrepreneurs with mental health. That's like my day job when I'm not like grieving
I
or
mean, I
writing
would assume
sad
the business
books.
was booming.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Which is a weird thing
Yeah.
for both of us.
Yeah.
Like doing a businessy thing
Mhm.
related to the death of someone you love
Mm-hmm.
and how like
Right,
weird that is.
commercializing
Yeah.
grief. But I think that, that's what this book is about too. I think that it's just true emotion. And if you can take true emotion and make it accessible to people who maybe can't express themselves as eloquently, it's art. So if you make an extra $10, like, isn't that nice?
Right.
Yeah,
You must have got a better royalty deal than I did.
Some months are good, some are not. Yeah, but I get it.
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of curious if folks have questions for either of us. Did you plan anyone in the audience with a friendly question for you?
No, not.
Anything?
Yes.
Y'all talked about using writing as a form of like processing. At some point, I'm imagining it took over as like a form of like creativity and like putting something into the world. Did process come into that at some point, or was it always just like processing, grieving?
Oh yeah.
Like, were there any particularities?
Yeah, I'm a very structured writer, so I always have, spend a lot of time in the outline and first the synopsis, then the outline, so that I have a roadmap for where the plot's going to go to make sure the plot makes sense. And once I had, the book is so much based on my own experience, but it also the storyline that never happened. So I had to push the two together to make it make sense. I wish all the stream of consciousness writing came before I decided to write the book.
Yeah, I just wrote in a journal as things were unfolding in my life. And then I would find myself like sending little sections to a client or a friend or someone who lost their dad or someone whose brother had mental, and I was like giving it to people, and I thought, oh, I seem to really want to share this. And I'd written quite a lot over the two deaths and had 50,000 words and was kind of like, I wonder if this is a book, which is a very nonlinear, circuitous path. I would not recommend. I think an outline is a super good idea.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have to have a map.
Yeah. But my book reads a little bit like a series of quick thoughts, which works for people I think in grief who are like, I can't like jump in, but I can read 3 pages.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And did you want to be a writer?
I've done a lot of writing in my life, a lot of academic writing. On the road to a PhD, obviously, lots and lots of papers and creative writing. As I thought about narrative therapy, helping people use language and writing to express, but it was always for other people, right? It was always from like a technical perspective. And so to have it available to me when I needed it was really a gift that I was lucky to encounter. But I really enjoy writing. I don't know if it's my superpower, but
I think it might.
but I like it.
Yeah.
We'll see. There'll be more books.
Good.
You had a
Yes.
question?
So this kind of relates So in school, I wrote, it was a big book that lasted like a lot of months to write fully. It was about spiders. and,
It was very
and
good.
it was kind of like my mom's, because I had to, like, tell my teacher I had to bring it to her like every single sentence. Like,
Lots of
is this
good.
good? Is this good? Is this?
Yeah, and you persevered. Yes,
She
Zoe.
gave me like notes every time I would.
That's
Yeah.
a good editor who gives you lots of
You gotta
notes.
take the notes.
And I took like a lot of.
It was a beautiful book, Liv. I was very
Well,
proud.
Not
Wait.
everyone got to see it because there was a thing in the classroom. In the winter, the
Pipes
the
burst.
pipe burst and it ruined everything.
His book was
The
destroyed.
book was
Aw.
lost. Oh man.
He was a champ. Yes,
So not
Zoe.
everyone got to see it.
But also, there was a chance that it might get like onto one of the apps that we use when you're
Yeah.
reading because we saw an example of someone else's book when they were doing this project on a app that we were using to read on our like tablet.
And in the
Maybe it will be
drawings
recovered.
took forever
I
to,
know, they're really
especially
special.
mine because of the spiders. It's not just drawing lines on the.
I know. It's so detailed. I know.
Yep,
I know.
draw
We're
each,
gonna stick
like,
with it.
shape.
All those legs.
All those legs.
I think we have a question in the far back.
Sure. This is a question for both of you, but the impetus of it is, if I heard your bio correctly, you are a Jewish writer,
Yes.
and I know that in the process of facing down the death and dying of a loved one, these are moments when many of us turn to cultural practices, and those cultural practices can help us through that process, or they can impede us through our process if those cultural practices don't work well for us. So I would love to hear both of you talk about how or if or to what extent whatever cultural beliefs, cultural practices each of you hold around death and dying helped, hurt, impeded you as you kind of moved through this process.
It's a really thoughtful question. I grew up in a Jewish household. There were like 4 Jews in Mobile, Alabama. My parents were from New York. And it was important. We went to Sunday school. I studied Hebrew. I believed in God. I thought the soul went on. I also thought life was fair. Never occurred to me that this would happen in a million years. My husband was very soulful and spiritual. He was Israeli. So his version of God and the soul was much more spiritual and inherently so. When he died, I lost all. I thought that was it. Like, we live and then we die and then that's it. But as I dialed back in and as I mentioned to her, seeing it happen and what the shells that are left, my belief was reawakened, and the way that he shows up in these two, and even in me sometimes, is beautiful. And my father too. Like, my father was ready to go. We got to say goodbye to him. And he was the kind of guy, when he was gone, he was gone. But then I feel his presence all the time. Not in a creepy way, but in an uplifting way.
I think I would answer in a similar way, in the sense that I grew up also in a very religious household, and there was a lot of structure around soul and heaven and things like that. I wrote in my book an essay about my experience of being at my dad's memorial service, which was a fairly traditional sort of Christian service held in a church, and the pastor called my dad by the wrong name.
Oh my God.
Like, eulogized Tom, whoever the hell Tom is.
Oh
My dad was Tim,
Oh.
and I haven't been in a church since. Like, it just was such a
Right.
not doing that. However, similarly, in my own deeper, quiet spaces, there is almost a reemergence of opening to mystery or faith,
Mm-hmm.
but I felt quite off. I mean, it wasn't just this one occasion, but like quite unsupported or distant from the cultural practices that were available to me from the traditions that I grew up in that felt really void and frustrating in like,
No one could answer it either.
yeah.
Every rabbi I asked was like,
Oh.
like, that's not helpful.
Yeah.
But I need you to tell me why this happened. Of course, no one can tell you why that happened, but it's an impossible place to be. You have to find that answer in yourself.
And maybe the why isn't always offered, important,
Right.
or you just sort of come to terms with the not having an answer.
Right.
My brother died by suicide when he was 33, and so that loss is a tricky why loss. I mean, they all are, right?
Yeah.
But I think that one has
That's-
some like extra teeth.
Yeah.
And so, in the aftermath of his death, the faith community was particularly unhelpful, unfortunately.
That's awful.
And so I think the loading around choice and volition and free will and blah 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 blah, it wasn't your time, like all of that stuff just was so off-putting and unhelpful that I think I kind of wiped my hands of the why conversation and looking for an external model that would help solve it or soothe me, because those just didn't. Thank you for the question.
Thank you
Great
both.
question.
The gentleman in green.
Did you have like a special person that motivated you to write?
Good question.
Gima. My dad.
So on my birthday,
Oh
there
god,
was
let me
a
make sure it Does this relate to the reading?
Yes.
Okay.
So, no. Pass.
Yes. Okay.
Pause.
Yes.
Do you think you're gonna keep writing about what has happened? Like, what, when that happened? And if so, how many books do you think you're gonna write?
That's a nice question. This book was the last of the, I guess, immediate experience. I think my grief will show up in new characters for the rest of my writing career, but this will be the last one that's that close to my life until I'm a millionaire and they ask me to write a memoir.
About how you organize your shoes.
Exactly.
You're like, that one I got.
That's what's gonna get me to the top. Yeah.
Any questions from this side of the room? Comments, thoughts?
I'm a little curious just about like journaling and memoirs and just sort of like this. I mean, it's very personal work that's both of you've been writing about, and just this idea of. I mean, I kept a journal at various points when I was young, but I mean that idea of like going back and like reading it again, or like what you. I mean, I would never. And then I'm like, what, you know? But I'm encouraging my kids a little bit, or we're starting to a little bit, like maybe you just need to write down some of your feelings
Oh yeah.
as a way to like, you know, figure out just how to get them out somehow. But like that idea of going back and then reading that or using that, or I don't know. It's like it's just kind of interesting territory for a
Yeah.
writer. I feel like to maybe be in as well, because you're also expressing that then more personally within.
Yeah. You can speak to that first.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the psychologist part of me is like, writing is extraordinarily helpful for us to take our emotions, thoughts, sort of the things that are swirling around in our minds and look with them with a little bit of distance and a little bit of objectivity. And so the process of writing kind of moves it through out on the paper, which allows us to interact with it differently. I think the transition for me in where I felt almost like compulsive need to write was that what was happening to me and in my life felt so surreal. Like this unraveling of like my posse of humans in a very short time that felt very fast. And I would almost write to kind of like track the timeline of what happened. so I could, it was almost the other way. It was almost like it was going from the page into my brain because I couldn't absorb it the other way. It felt surreal. So I think writing serves a lot of those purposes. And in therapy, specifically with people who've experienced trauma, or there's a little bit of like a depersonalization or dissociation from events that have happened, writing is a real anchor because it does give these concrete like timelines and linear order to things that can feel absolutely out of the realm of possibility. So we use it a lot for that therapeutically too.
Yeah, I kept a journal since I was 8, and I have read them. And I like 8 to like 25.
Did you want to take a bubble bath with someone?
God, uncomfortable with anything that I wrote. But what was hilarious is I'm the same person. I'm exactly the same kid. Like the 8-year-old Zoe is the 46-year-old Zoe. I've just experienced so much more. And to read the innocent version of yourself versus slowly figuring out who you are, what you deserve, what not to accept. For me, as a human, that's so important. When Renan died, I started writing him letters to like a journal, and I have like 100 of them, just the daily happenings, and it felt so normal when everything felt unnormal. But in terms of for your kids, I cannot recommend it enough. It was so important for me. That's how I knew I was gonna be a writer, because I always felt so much better.
I feel like it really helped me, like writing as a child and on into adulthood, like know my own voice. Almost before I could speak it or live it in the real world, it's like I was practicing my own voice, my own thoughts, my own beingness.
Yeah, and no matter how many phases I went through, and there were lots, it was the same person experiencing a different, uniform.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, I have a question about, because you both talked about like writing, processing, like documenting, but I'm also interested in what it's like to have folks respond to what you've written, which for you at the time is cathartic. Like I do writing, but it's a very different style of writing. It's more journalistic or policy oriented. But I was just remembering when you were both talking, my dad had a kidney transplant like 12 years ago, and I was doing like the Caring Bridge site, like with the updates. And I remember, being in the hospital, being in the waiting room, like, just, picking up like important details about the healing and the surgery, but also just like reflecting on what it was like to be in the hospital at that time, and people would comment on that, and that became like, I forgot about how important that was until you both just brought it up, just like this in the moment, like document / processing, but that element of other people then responding to that raw thing that you put out there. Like, I'm just curious to hear what other people's like responses to your ability to do that was like,
It's incredible. It's an honor. It always feels amazing. I mean, I wrote an article for Modern Love in the New York Times. It was just an essay I wrote about Renan and how we showed up in the two of them, and it just it was the easiest thing I've ever written. I thought there's no way in hell this is gonna get in. I got in, and I got tweets from people all over the universe, and it was the best feeling I've ever had. You said what I can't. Like, well, that's the biggest honor.
I think there's a really intentional shift, at least there was for me, in my writing that was mine. And then when I held the book in my hands, the writing was no longer for me. It was like for the collective. It was like my offering to whoever needs this thing. And so from that, it was helpful to really process that transition, because of course I receive all of the like wonderful thank you notes and like the affirmations from people who've benefited from the book, but I also sort of release the words for the service of other people, and I'm less like, it's not about me protecting my story or telling my story. Like, it really is sort of an act that's a gift that I release to the collective.
Yeah, whether or not it makes any impact. I mean, my feeling was just so happy to have unloaded it for myself, and the hope is that it would lighten somebody else's load. If it did it, fine.
My work is done.
Yeah.
Every time when I write, my arm hurts so bad, and then when I'm done, I'm like, oh, finally.
I know what that feels like.
And then I give it to my teacher, and she says, sorry, that was wrong. So he goes, and then I'm like,
My life, lab.
Sore arms.
Yes.
that's what I have to. That's what I had to do like a million times.
I know, but it's always worth it.
But when I was done, I was like, yes, I know.
That feeling.
Was there any point where you just didn't know if you really wanted to be a writer?
Not 1 second. Yes.
Is there any point where like you like started
You sure?
Is there, in,
Last question.
is there, are you sometimes like, when you're in like the middle of writing for like the time you're like, oh, I want to be done with this book already.
All the time.
I think there reaches a point where you're so tired
Oh my
of
God.
reading the same, like I can't think of a better way to
Right.
say it,
There's
like
nothing
just
else I can
going
do.
through the process.
And you step away, give it a couple of days, and
Yeah.
when it occurs to you that actually you can make it better, and then you go in, you do it. It's one of the best feelings. It always seems impossible until it's done.
Yeah.
so while you were like feeling sad over the loss of Ronan, what was the most comforting thing someone ever said to you?
Such a good question. It's very thoughtful about. I think the most comforting thing was your mom and friends visiting every month for a year. They would leave their own kids behind, and my brother moved to Atlanta. My mom and dad moved to Atlanta. But Oreo came later. But for every month for a year, a girlfriend visited and left their families behind and took these guys everywhere so I could just get it together. It was the kindest thing I've ever witnessed and experienced, and it's the whole purpose of this book, to thank them. Good question.
Yes.
I should ask something. How many rewrites do you usually go through,
Lord.
and then do you ever disagree with your editor's comments?
Yeah.
Like, who wins that?
My
battle?
editor, Diana, like Lord bless her, she just went rounds with me about lots
That's
of things.
cool. I've never gone rounds. Tell
Oh
me more.
yeah. There were, well, okay, she really wanted me to write as a psychologist. It was a little bit of a memoir thing. She was like, okay, your story, sad, nice,
Yeah.
move along.
Do you have
What do you have to
platform?
offer someone that's helpful to them? And so she encouraged me to write at the end of each chapter some kind of like practical, tactical, helpful thing. And I really resisted it because I was just like, let it be art.
Yeah.
And she was like, make it be helpful. So we had a lot of tension around that, but I think ultimately she was absolutely right, and
Amazing,
she
right.
really pushed me to do it, and I think those are some of the like juiciest offerings in the book. But it was definitely not my vision for how I wanted to write it. But again, it was a little bit like, we're not going to publish just a memoir, like you need to offer
who are
something
you?
else.
Yeah. No, it's
but I was
totally-
really grateful for her.
I've always been grateful for my editors. This one probably, the first draft was horrible. It was so bad. I wrote it during the pandemic in my garage. My brother and my mom came over 2 hours, 2 days a week to school them, and I went out to the garage, which is a straight up garage, like cockroach carcasses. I just like stared into space. And the first draft was terrible. So the letter you get back from a draft like that is terrible to receive. It's like, we love the idea, but 500 pages later, you have to start all over. They were right. I was afraid to put my heart in it. And once I leaned into that and said, this is the story I want to tell, I was much better for it. But I've never really come to blows. There are a lot of rounds on covers, lots of rounds on titles. Usually their editorial advice is spot on though.
That was true.
Oh yeah. Oh my god.
Yes, let's solve this problem. There you go.
Thank you.
Always a mom.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much guys for coming. I'm really touched. Minneapolis is so cool.
And this bookstore. which
Yes,
I love. This is my
this
home
bookstore is the bomb.
bookstore.
I love it so much.
This is my first reading. I've never been to a reading before, and it's wonderful.
They're not all
Thank
the
you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Magers and Quinn. Really appreciate it.
Of course, we're happy to have you here. Thank you for sharing everything that you brought with you and
Thank you.